Welcome to this week's episode of Insight. During this week's show, we're going to cover three items. The first one's going to be, we're going to review some very interesting comments made by former Artsakh State Minister Ruben Vardanyan. Then we're going to move on to the big story of the week, which was the desertion and the murders, the apparent murder committed by one of Aliyev's gunmen in Syunik. And we're going to close with some comments about the head of USAID, Samantha Power. Let's start off with the first topic of the week, which were some very interesting comments made by former Artsakh State Minister Ruben Vardanyan. These comments were made in an interview with the Aravot newspaper. In it, he said, those with good ties with high government officials make money for their pockets by using the blockade situation. I think more than the statement itself, it's somewhat of a giveaway about the reasons that he left Artsakh or was pushed out. It's very clear that whatever reforms that he was carrying out had stepped on too many feet of the local corrupt political clans. What we're seeing today and what people in Artsakh are living with is sort of the stupidity of this decision. Since then, we have heard reports of black market prices rising after he left. And most noticeably, we've seen how Artsakh has sort of disappeared from the world media scene, which prior to Mr. Vardanyan's departure, there was a lot more media coverage because he's obviously far more media savvy and had a successful team around him, which also explains the reason that the Aliyev regime wanted him out of Artsakh more than anything else.
In Europe, Vardanyan is out of our territory.
Now we're going to move on to the second topic of the week, which is the issue of the two apparent deserters from the Aliyev regime, who apparently crossed over into Armenian territory from the exclave of Nakhchivan. There are conflicting stories about what happened, about how they got into Armenia itself. The regime itself claims that they were lost in the fog. There are reports of them complaining that they're not being fed by their commanders, that they were looking for food. There's been other reports of them complaining about hazing, and that's the reason they needed to get away from their officers. Frankly, all of these are a possibility, given the track record of abuse that happens inside of the regime's militaries. But at this point, we really have none of this confirmed. The follow-up to this is a couple of days after the reports of these two deserters crossing into Armenia came out, and there was a sort of a manhunt, people looking for him. A murder came to light. There was a guard in a mine in Syunik that was found murdered. Then what came out was this video.
Andolsun teşavvuha bizi yaradan Allah'a. Gel sıkmış Ermənistan üstünə. Ermənləri qanıtdırmışıq. 400-500 erməni başlatmışıq. İndi hələ də sağıq, ölməmişik. İnşallah ölməyəcək. Ölsək belə hamı haqqımı verəsin. Biz vətən xain deyilik. Biz vətən üçün yaşayanlardanıq.
2 days ago, the man who appeared in this video, Hossein Akhundov, was actually charged with the murder of the watchman at the Zangezur copper mine. What can we say about this? Here you have two people that have either deserted or whatever has happened to them. And one of them, at least for one of them, their base instinct is the cowardly murder of a 50-year-old defenseless civilian. Frankly, this is the kind of people, or men in this case, that are produced by a sick, degenerate political system whose entire identity is created by the hatred of others, in this case Armenians, and a state which frankly has nothing else to offer the sum total of humanity. The reality of the moment that we're living in is we in Armenia are busy exporting tumor centers to the most advanced countries in the world, while Ilham's 10th century sultanate is busy exporting cowardly murderers. We're going to move on to the last topic of the week, which is some comments about Ms. Samantha Power, who's the head of USAID. USAID is the United States government's primary aid organization that provides aid in critical places or in distressed places around the world. It is, in fact, one of the great historical ironies that at this moment where we're seeing a second attempted Armenian genocide this time in Artsakh, the person who's actually the head of that organization is Miss Samantha Powers. Now, why do I say that? Because she is a well-known human rights activist, a genocide scholar, and who was actually a journalist in Srebrenica during the Bosnian genocide, and who has written actually extensively about the Armenian genocide, its lack of recognition, and what that has led to.
What's astounding about the century is that our policy is one of non-involvement and, a desire to maintain neutrality of all kinds, in the face of this kind of carnage and this kind of systematic killing.
What we have to ask ourselves, what has Ms. Powers done since the beginning of this illegal blockade by the Aliyev regime? Well, in truth, next to nothing. Has she denounced the regime in Baku? No. Has she sewn up at the site of the blockade at the border like the U.S. ambassador to Armenia did? No. Has she made any public comments? Has she made any plans, outlined how you would get aid to Artsakh, if for no other reason than to pressure the regime? She has done none of those things. One of the things that I decided to do is to go over for the past 2 months to review her social media content, mostly on Twitter. And she is quite active on Twitter, to see what she has to say in this particular case in which 120,000 people living in a democratic state are besieged by a fascist one, something that has not been seen in this region since the time of the Mongols. What I found in reviewing Ms. Powers' Twitter account for the past 2 months is there's not a single mention of the second biggest humanitarian disaster on the European continent after Ukraine. But what I did find is I found a lot of interesting things that tell us what Ms. Powers' actual priorities are. Example 1 on her Twitter is a tweet put out by Ms. Powers talking about her agency's support to assure gender equity in the Georgian recycling industry. After all, what is more important? Children with cancer in Artsakh not getting their treatment that they need, or making sure that the same number of women as men are picking up trash in the streets of Amman, Jordan. Example number 2, Ms. Powers actually retweets a program that she supports in Ukraine about making sure that the displaced dogs in Ukraine are getting all the food that they need. Note to Samantha, there are dogs in Artsakh also. Now, you might disagree with me that all human beings are created equal, but I hope that you will agree with me that all dogs are created equal. And if you, for whatever reason, do not believe that the dogs of Artsakh are equal to their cousin dogs in Ukraine, I would suggest that you tell them that yourself, since I don't have the heart to break them that news. Let's go to example number 3. Tweet number 3. Ms. Powers tweets about her agency providing generators in Ukraine to keep homes heated and lights on. Very good for you. We all support that. But Ms. Power, they could use some of those generators in Artsakh, where people have been cut off from gas and electricity for almost the entirety of winter. Ms. Power, I know what your response is going to be to this latest issue. It is true that we, as Armenians, are not on the officially approved victim list. But you know what? Even a bit of hypocrisy would be appreciated by the children and the elderly of Artsakh that are freezing in schoolrooms and hospitals without any action on your part. So what are we supposed to make of Ms. Powers' silence in regards to Artsakh? I think this is quite deliberate, and it's frankly reflective of policy. I am sure that her and her agency will be all over Armenia helping people that are ethnically cleansed parts of Artsakh, because I suspect that is her preference at this point. I can already imagine, I can see the scene of her looking really sad, holding the hand of a 5-year-old refugee girl, looking really sad in a refugee camp. Now, you might also ask, why am I picking on her? Why am I talking about her, not the other political actors that have sort of disgraced themselves in this process, whether it's Ursula von der Leyen or Toivo Klaw or Tony Blinken himself, as a matter of fact? Because none of these people, for all of their flaws, have never worn the moral mantle or claimed the moral mantle that she has. And more importantly, none of them have made their careers or their fortunes pawning off and selling the suffering of our ancestors. In close, Ms. Power, we will make sure that you and your entire career will be judged on your action or inaction in this current blockade of Artsakh. I'm going to wrap this up with a quote, one of my favorite quotes from the divine Dante, in which he said, "The hottest places in hell are reserved for those who in times of great moral crisis maintain their neutrality." Well, I'm not sure if there is an afterlife, but if there is one, we will know where to find you. Samantha, thank you for joining me in this episode of Insights.
Then there are some people, they're not stupid, they're full of shit. That doesn't take very long to spot either, does it? Take you about the same amount of time. You'll be listening to some guy and say, well, he's fairly intelligent. He's full of shit.